Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. Here we are in 2025, and we just finished a wonderful lecture, or about to finish the lectures on trains. And there's a lot of interest in trains, and Arkansas has been home to trains and various lines forever. If you've never heard our guest speaker, he's presented several wonderful educational programs. Mike Seipold is the senior pastor of Friendship Church in Northwest Arkansas. His son happens to be Nathan Seipold, our wonderful event technician who's running sound and lights right now. Yay, Nathan. And Mike is here once again to talk to us about trains that touched Eureka Springs. He is a train enthusiast, historian, and he did go with us to Kansas City a couple of years ago, and we had a wonderful trip up there and went to the, what's it called?
Union Station.
Union Station, and oh my goodness, so much history there. So he's going to talk to us about Eureka Springs. Hopefully when the weather warms up, we can do a little field trip over toward Eureka. And now we're talking about other train trips across the country, and Mike would be great to have along, right? To tell us about all of it. So let's give Mike a big, warm Butterfield welcome.
Thank you, Ricky. Well, Happy New Year. Happy New Year. I'm going to talk to you today about the railroad history of Eureka Springs. And you notice my title, I put the story of Eureka Springs and the railroads. And you're probably wondering, Eureka Springs, didn't it just have one railroad at one time? And the truth is, it had, depending on how you count, 6, 7, 8 different railroad corporations over the years. So I'm going to try to cover in about an hour about 145 years of history. And there's so much. You know, the hardest thing about preparing a presentation like this is what to leave in and what to edit out. So bear with me as we go through, but I'm going to walk you through not just the story of the railroad, but a lot of interesting information of how the railroad came to be, some engineering issues that they had, a wondrous hotel that they helped build, a haunted hotel, which we'll talk about a little bit, and the St. Louis people that helped finance it. So we're going to talk about a variety of things, and I hope you'll enjoy the presentation. So to begin our story with Eureka Springs, just a little recap of the history. Our story begins in the late 1800s. A man by the name of Dr. Alva Jackson claimed that he had found healing, curative waters from a spring in Carroll County that he had discovered back in 1854. In May of 1879, Dr. Jackson took his friend, Judge L.B. Saunders, who had a bad leg infection that was not healing, and he had consulted all kinds of doctors. So Dr. Jackson took him to the spring to hopefully cure this incurable leg sore. Judge Saunders camped out at the site. He washed his leg regularly in the spring, and guess what? He received his cure. And so he spread the word, and it's amazing before Facebook and all this, but the word spread, and by July 1st, 1879, some 20 families were already at the miracle healing waters seeking cures for their various ailments as well. Eureka Springs was born. And the next year, on February 14th, 1880, the Eureka Springs was incorporated, and by the census time of that year, the population had exploded to 3,984 residents, which is amazing, and a lot of other historians have said that just included the residents, but the people coming in had swelled the population of Eureka Springs to somewhere near 8,000 people. The only way in and out of the city at that time, of course, was by wagons and stagecoaches. But fortunately, there was developments happening in the nation, and a railroad called the Frisco, the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad, was building from St. Louis westward. So this is the story of Eureka Springs, its railroads, from past to present day. So let's go back to the 1850s. Here's a map that shows the railroad development. The Hannibal and St. Joseph was the first railroad in Missouri. It was chartered by the Missouri legislature in 1847. In 1850, the state legislature, did it not advance? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I've got to advance 2 slides. I'm sorry. I'll get it right here. So I'll remember to do that. So the Hannibal and St. Joseph, which is orange on the map that you see here, was chartered by the Missouri legislature in 1847. In 1850, the state legislature chartered the Pacific Railroad Company. That would be the railroad that would end up coming through northwest Arkansas. It would have two lines. One line, which is yellow on the map, would run from St. Louis through the towns on the Missouri River up to Kansas City. The second railroad line, which is red on the map, that's our line, would run from St. Louis along the Springfield Road to Springfield. And the second line was also known as the Southwest Branch of the Southwest Pacific. So that kind of shows how the railroad started heading our direction. The Hannibal and St. Joseph was completed in 1859, crossing the state of Missouri. The next year, the line was connected to St. Charles. The Southwest Branch of the Pacific Railroad, or the Southwest Pacific, which is red on the map, was built to Rolla, Missouri by 1860. By 1865, the Pacific Railroad was completed to Kansas City, and this Southwest Branch of the Pacific Railroad was completed to Lebanon, Missouri. Then by 1870, the Southwest Pacific was bought by the South Pacific Railroad Company in 1868, and it was completed to Springfield, Missouri in 1870. Almost everyone in the city came out to see that first train entering Springfield, Missouri. By 1876, the South Pacific was now bought by a company and renamed the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company. The line, which is red on the map, was continued into Oklahoma Territory a little later. In 1876, the Atlantic and Pacific Company was bought by the St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad Company, which was nicknamed the Frisco. Y'all follow all of that? Now, the Frisco is the railroad, of course, that came through northwest Arkansas, and that's how the line would eventually get to Eureka Springs. Never made it to San Francisco, but did indeed have its headquarters in St. Louis. Well, the Frisco continued west of Veneta, Indian Territory, until Congress restricted further westward expansion. So the Frisco management, they looked at northwest Arkansas and they found several potential attractions here. General Manager C.W. Rogers was attracted through the prospect of through freights to Texas, while Frisco Director Joseph Seligman saw northwest Arkansas as, quote, rich in tobacco and timber stores without an outlet. And President Edward Winslow of the Frisco wanted to build to the booming health town of Eureka Springs. He had heard about the curative waters. And the railroad contractors had crews available from a recent extension, what they call the Kansas extension, that went to Wichita. So on July 9th, 1880, grading began 5 miles east of Pierce City at a new town called Plymouth, Missouri, which is now, we know it as Monette, Missouri, if you're familiar with that area. So people began coming to, I am not advancing the right slides. I'm sorry. There, that's all you missed. I promise. That's all you missed right there. There we go. Now I'm going to just keep this in my hand. People began coming to the springs within weeks of the news of Saunders' cure, and by July 1879, there were 20 families camped along the narrow valley. By 1881, the town had grown to the point where it could be included in a directory of Arkansas cities. While, quote, rudely constructed of pine lumber and resembling a great camp, end quote, Eureka Springs was already attracting the sick in vast, vast numbers. Early promotional literature promised radical cures for, quote, rheumatism, cancer, sore paralysis, ulcers, asthma, and other diseases particular to dyspepsia, kidney diseases, liver complaints, and scrofula. So the census in 1880, as I mentioned earlier, reported just almost at 4,000 people. And in May 1881, the local census claimed more than 8,000 people. And what's amazing at that time is the city at that time was larger than Bentonville, Fayetteville, and even Fort Smith, if you can imagine that. In addition, thousands of temporary visitors swelled the population there. Businesses including blacksmiths, livery stables, grocery stores, clothing, and general merchandise stores and lumber yards were established, and Eureka Springs was on its way to becoming a commercial center, not only for Carroll County, but for the surrounding areas as well. to advance. Okay, so by 1880, the nearest railroad to Eureka was the Frisco at Pierce City, Missouri, not far from Monett, Missouri, on the line of the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad. So that was a distance of 55 miles. So before the railroads, many passengers then for the Springs detrained at Pierce City. They hired hacks of liverymen to take them over the tortuous trail to Eureka. Soon Eureka began, the stages began meeting the trains at Pierce City, and a lucrative business then ensued. In 1880, a line of coaches, and they called them the 9-hour line. They called it the 9-hour line for the time it took to make that 55-mile trip. They went into business transporting Springs-bound passengers at $3 each. And that road, really, it was only a rough track in the mud, forded the roaring river in Missouri 19 times at a distance of 9 miles. This is an 1881 Frisco Lines map. The Eureka Springs Railroad was formed when the demand for better transportation to the burgeoning resort town prompted investors to start the Eureka Springs Railway to build a connection with the Frisco at Seligman, Missouri. The 303-mile main line of the Central Division ultimately would go from Monett, Missouri, down to Paris, Texas. It opened on July 1st, 1887. So that's the line, of course, that went through Springdale, Fayetteville, this area, and it was a very, very important line with connections to Dallas and Galveston over the Santa Fe Railroad. And you can see from this 1912 map that the Frisco was building all kinds of lines. You can see around the tri-state area, the mining and all that was going on around Baxter Springs, Joplin, and that area. But this one obstacle, at least for a time, was Indian Territory. They finally got approval to build through. It was more profitable for the railroad to haul one passenger a given distance than to haul a ton of freight the same distance. The passenger rate per mile back then was 50% higher than the rate for a ton of freight, and passengers cost less to move. Passengers weighed less, took up less space, and loaded themselves. And passenger cars at this time constituted about 1% of the railroad's rolling stock, but generated almost 16% of the revenues for the railroad. So before railroad officials gave the final approval to that southern branch to Texas in April 1880, they personally visited Eureka Springs. In the gold rush atmosphere of that time, the Frisco's 1880 annual report claimed and probably believed that the town had indeed a population of about 8,000, about twice the number counted from the earlier census. But subsequent annual reports continued to emphasize the importance of the town, and the railroad took notice. As soon as the railroad reached South Berry County, it helped finance a spur to Eureka and founded the new town of Seligman as its railhead. In March 1882, almost a year before the spur opened in February of 1883, the Frisco published a promotional booklet on Eureka Springs trying to attract people to the new railroad and the line. Well, this was the railroad, the Frisco line, which actually was formed on September 7th, 1876, and actually ran until 1980, when it was then taken over by the Burlington Northern Railroad. But the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad was incorporated in Missouri September 7th, 1876, and it formed the Missouri Division and Central Division of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. Their goal was to build a transcontinental railroad. This land grant line was only one of two railroads, the other one being the Missouri-Kansas-Texas, or what's called the Katy Railroad, authorized by the federal government to build across Indian Territory. So now I want to talk to you about some of the people that made all this happen. This is the president at that time, the president of the Frisco Railroad, Edward Francis Winslow. He was an American soldier, railroad executive, a merchant who served as a colonel and brigadier general of the 4th Iowa Cavalry Regiment during the American Civil War. From 1864 to 1865, he was born in 1837 in Augusta, Maine. He moved to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, when he was 19 years old. And it was there that he became involved in railroad construction, helping to build the St. Louis, Vandalia, and Terre Haute Railroad. He would later participate in numerous Union Army campaigns of the Army of the Tennessee, including at the siege of Vicksburg. He served as president of the Frisco and vice president of the Atlanta and Pacific Railroad Company. And under all of this responsibility, his health began to fail, and he was forced to retire. He died of heart failure at age 77 in 1914. Another important player in this whole history of the railroads was this man, Captain Charles Warrington Rogers, and my hometown up the road is named after him. He was born October 7th, 1834 in Exeter, New Hampshire. He was orphaned at age 10. At age 15, he went to sea, sailing around Cape Horn to reach California the next year. He became the captain of the merchant ship Winfield Scott, on which he circumnavigated the globe. In April 1963, he married Mary Shaw, the daughter of Tristram Shaw of New Hampshire, and then joining the Union forces in the Civil War that same year, he was appointed acting ensign and commander of the gunboat Hydrangea and remained in service until November 1865, participating in the naval operations in the vicinity of Charleston, South Carolina. He returned to trade before coming to Missouri in 1871 as an employee of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. He then became general manager of the St. Louis San Francisco in May 1879 and was elected second vice president in March 1881. He was named first vice president in 1883, was a director of the Continental Bank of St. Louis, a member of the St. Louis Club and Commercial Club. He died at age 52 on February 21st, 1887 in South Pasadena, California, and he's buried in St. Louis. He was the general manager of the construction of the railroad through Northwest Arkansas, and of course Rogers is named after him. Another important person to know in this whole story is Richard Cairns. He was the president and largest stockholder of the newly formed Eureka Springs Railway. He was born in Kilberry, County Meath in Ireland, and was brought to the U.S. in infancy. He was educated in the public schools of Jackson County, Iowa, and throughout the Civil War, he served in the Union Army. After the war, he lived in Arkansas and also in San Diego, and was contractor for the Overland Mail. In 1876, he moved to St. Louis, and thereafter he was interested in the construction of railroads and was active in the Republican politics of Missouri. From 1909 to 1913, he was ambassador to Austria-Hungary. In 1904, he was awarded the Latter Medal by the University of Notre Dame, the oldest and most prestigious award for American Catholics. He had been a military colleague of Powell Clayton, who had prospered in the overland mail business before moving to St. Louis in 1876. And like Powell Clayton, Mr. Cairns fell in love with the beauty of Eureka Springs, and he invested heavily in the line. So that kind of gives you a picture of some of the St. Louis connections, some of the investors that were involved in the building of the line. Now, what that would ultimately bring to Eureka Springs is luxurious palace cars like this, a Pullman observation sleeper. This car is from the Burlington Railroad. Many executives from railroads all across the nation were invited to come via train to Eureka Springs once the line was concluded. Here's a picture of, there it is. Here's a picture of Mr. Cairns. He's standing on the steps just above the three men on the ground. That's Mr. Cairns. And that is a Frisco luxurious business car that the executives rode, Frisco number 100 in Eureka Springs. Mr. Cairns was quite well-to-do, and he actually had his own car built at Pullman. This is 1894. It's real interesting. There was a huge Pullman strike in 1894, but at some point during that year, Richard Cairns had his private Pullman car named after his eldest daughter, Catherine Cairns, built. And it's lettered for the West Virginia Central and Pittsburgh Railroad. Apparently he was involved in that railroad at some time. So he had his own private car, and he would bring this car to Eureka Springs quite often, as I understand. Another person we mentioned just a moment ago is Powell Clayton. He was the vice president of the Eureka Springs Railway and the general manager. He was a Pennsylvanian who had been a practicing civil engineer before the Civil War. And during the Civil War, he fought for the Union in Missouri and Arkansas, and he rose to the rank of brigadier general. And after the war, he purchased 40,000 acres of land near Pine Bluff and became a wealthy cotton farmer. He served as governor of the state of Arkansas from 1868 to 1871 before being elected U.S. Senator from Arkansas. In 1880, he was elected president of both the Missouri and Arkansas portions of this proposed Eureka Springs Railway. He spent most of the year 1881 lining up financing. In 1882, he established a home in the developing resort town, and he was also president of the Eureka Improvement Company and worked to develop commercial and residential properties in the city. He died in Washington, D.C. in 1914 and is interred at the Arlington National Cemetery. A couple more names that we need to get familiar with is Logan Holt Roots. Was an American politician who served the U.S. representative for Arkansas's 1st Congressional District from 1868 to 1871. He was a member of the Republican Party. His namesake is the Fort Logan H. Roots. He was born in Perry County, Illinois, and completed preparatory studies, graduated in 1862 from Illinois State Normal University. He assisted the recruiting of the 81st Illinois Infantry, in which he served until the close of the Civil War. He was commissioned as first lieutenant, and by the time of his discharge in 1865, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. And after the war, Roots settled in Arkansas to engage in planting and business. He was another military comrade of Powell Clayton and had prospered in several businesses after moving south to Little Rock. He and his brother were instrumental in the founding of the Eureka Improvement Company, and he was elected treasurer of the Eureka Springs Railway. And then finally, one more person to get to know, Joseph Seligman. He was an American banker and businessman who founded the J&W Seligman and Company, which made a number of investments in railroads. He was a patriarch of what became known as the Seligman family in the U.S. and was subsequently related to the wealthy Guggenheim family through Peggy Guggenheim's mother, Florette. On September 27th of 1880, the town of Rollers Ridge, or it was also called Herdsville at one time in Missouri, was renamed Seligman, and in honor of Mr. Seligman and in recognition of the benefits that the railroad had brought to the community. In gratitude, his wife, Babette Seligman, donated 1 acre of land and $500 toward the building of a church, which I understand still stands today near downtown Seligman. He died in New Orleans at age 60. So let's get to the railroad now. The red line that you see on the map is the Frisco Railroad coming through northwest Arkansas. Of course, you can see Rogers at the bottom of the map there. The line at Plymouth, or later Monette, was chartered as the St. Louis, Arkansas, and Texas Railway and was begun July 9th, 1880, and by November of that year, it reached the Arkansas border, a distance of some 32 miles. The new town of Seligman was founded at milepost 313.6, that's 313.6 miles from St. Louis by rail, and some 30.6 miles from where the St. Louis and Arkansas and Texas Railway left the Frisco main line. And like other towns on the line, such as Exeter, Missouri, and Rogers and Springdale, Seligman was located on a high plateau. And that was important. The elevations of the Ozarks was separated from Eureka Springs by the valley of the White River. But what was more important was Seligman was only 18 and a half miles from Eureka Springs by that valley of the White River. But what we found here was general manager of the Frisco, Captain C.W. Rogers. He wrote this quote on January 2nd, 1881. Here's what he wrote. The station at Seligman is 18 miles from the famous Eureka Springs, a place now with 8,000 people. Get my notes here. Although but 18 months old, travel to the springs is growing larger every month, and I will believe prove to be of value to this road. Parties are not preparing to construct, parties are now preparing to construct a branch line from Seligman to Eureka Springs, intending, it is stated, to extend such line through to Little Rock via Harrison. That was kind of the grand goal at that time. Now, did it happen? Let's take a look at this map. This is a 1899 map. The line, as you can see by the dashed black line, was indeed projected to go down to Conway and then down into Little Rock. That never happened. But what I did do is on this slide is I did draw a blue line. That's the line that it would later be extended to, of all places, Helena, Arkansas. So the blue line is actually the line that actually later got built. So this is a 19, what year was this? Yeah, this is a 1909 plat of the town of Seligman, only 18 and a half miles from Eureka Springs. It was chosen to be the connecting point where the branch would come up from Eureka Springs into Seligman, connect to the big Frisco, and you could go to St. Louis or Texas or wherever you wanted to go. So the Eureka Improvement Company began promoting and planning what would become the Eureka Springs Railroad. I did a Google Earth view. This is a recent view, and I just wanted to show you the Frisco Railroad is the one that just runs, north and south here. But just north of the old downtown, the line would split off and go through a steep hollow downgrade all the way to a place called Pender. Now, a lot of this has been filled in. There used to be a little bridge here. It's been filled in. They moved Highway 37 out here, kind of a bypass. That's been filled in. But this is a large ravine that the railroad would be running down. It was a 2.65% grade down what is called Butler Hollow. And I'm going to speak like the locals. I was born and raised in Rogers. Butler Holler. Okay? So it ran down Butler Holler, and on the main lines of railroads, grades are generally 1% or less, and grades steeper than about 2.2% are rare. So given a choice, railroads, when they're building the railroads, will always follow a straight as possible level path. Trains use less energy, speeds are higher, and there's less wear on equipment when railroads can build on a narrow straight line. But we know that land, especially in Arkansas, land rises and falls, obstacles must be avoided, and this requires grades to compensate for the changes in elevation and curves to reorient the direction of the tracks. And just a little scientific deal here, gradient is expressed in terms of the number of feet of rise per 100 feet of horizontal distance. For example, if a track rises 1 foot over the distance of 100 feet, that gradient is said to be 1%, a 1% grade. So, cars can go up steep grades, trains cannot. In the 11-mile stretch from Seligman down to Beaver, if you know where Beaver's at on the White River, there's a kind of a suspension bridge that's there. They call it the Golden Gate of the Ozarks. If you know where Beavertown is at, this 11-mile stretch from Seligman to Beaver and the White River, the elevation changed from 1,540 feet down to 934 feet. And the right-of-way twisted and turned all the way along Butler Creek. So Seligman looked like this back in the day. Once the railroad had arrived, there was indeed a yard there. The tracks that you're looking at right here is the Frisco line. This is coming from Monette down, headed toward Rogers, Fayetteville. This is the connecting track over. This track behind the depot is the Eureka Springs track, and they even put in a little Armstrong turntable where they could turn the locomotive around. And this picture's so interesting because you can see the old commercial district of the huge metropolis of Seligman, Missouri. Now, we were talking about that grade. This shows a train climbing Seligman Hill. They're coming into Seligman. Again, 2.65% grade, so it's very steep for the railroad. This is about a half mile from downtown Seligman. This photo was taken in 1910. Here's another photo of a freight train climbing Seligman Hill into Seligman. Again, 2.65% grade. And this photo as well was taken in 1910. Notice the logs on the Frisco gondola cars. That shows you some of the commercial business that they were doing with the hardwood industry coming out of the Eureka area. Well, when they built the line, they reached the White River at Beaver after they had descended down Butler Hollow. And construction crews then had to dynamite and blast a 60-foot deep cut out of a narrow limestone ridge that separated the White River from the Leatherwood Creek watercourses. And this blast became known as the Narrows. It can still be seen today. Then they would begin putting in the caissons in the water and begin building the rock work for the structure to hold the bridge. And you can see the cut over to the right, the Narrows over to the right. And you can see during construction what this appeared to look like. This is just the same picture, just zoomed out a little bit, where you can get the full idea of what it looked like there to build the bridge. This is pretty much the most difficult engineering part of the line to Eureka Springs. Finally, they got the bridge in place. In late 1882, the bridge was in place, and the town of Eureka Springs would be reached by rail on February 1st, 1883. This just shows an early train crossing the White River Bridge headed toward Eureka Springs. Here's another picture taken atop the Narrows. And you can see, if you look just to the right of the bridge structure, you can see a little train coming around the curve. The buildings off in the distance, that's the little town of Beaver. So these are early photos. I don't have the date or the photographer for these. The 18.5 mile branch from Seligman to Eureka would be completed, as I said, in February of 1883. It would pass through a little community called Pender. This is still up in Missouri, where the railroad had a water tank for the locomotives. It leveled out just briefly there, and the trains could stop and take on water. And then it would cross into the state of Arkansas near a place called Walden, and then to Beaver, and then cross the White River at the Narrows. And then it would follow Leatherwood Creek through little places that don't really exist anymore, called Leatherwood, Skelton, and Gaskins, to a place called the Junction. And the Junction was actually where it would turn and head south into the 2-mile trek into Eureka Springs. We'll talk more about the Junction here in just a minute. Of course, the Frisco Railroad wanted in their promotional department, wanted to promote this all over the nation. So here, it makes it look like you can take a straight track from Kansas City to Eureka or Oklahoma or St. Louis or Texas or Memphis. But they certainly, the railroad promotion department did a good job in getting a lot of people, a lot of tourists to come to Eureka Springs. Here's a Eureka Springs Railway timetable, very rare. I only know of 2 in existence, showing the schedule of trains into the city. First-class passenger trains were scheduled for about 1 hour to make that 18.5-mile trip. Now, you may say, oh, that's just horrible. But when you consider what the stagecoach had to do, it's a lot faster, a lot more modern and convenient. Here's their first locomotive, the Eureka Springs Railway. This is a 280 consolidation, purchased new in 1882. It was retired in 1900, and they used the boiler at the Eureka Springs shops. They used the boiler for steam for the tools and all until the shops were relocated to Harrison in 1913. Whoa, how did I go that fast? There we go. There we are. All right. So this is a picture taken in the summer of 1883. It's a publicity photo at what is called Poker's Bluff in Beaver, with a brand new 440 American-type locomotive purchased from the Rogers Locomotive Works, But notice the construction. The construction crews, when they built the line, had to blast a narrow shelf underneath Poker Bluff, as seen here. The White River is off to the right. And this is now a walking trail. If you go to Beaver, you can walk the trail. Here's another publicity photo that the railroad took, this one about 1904. So the railroad makes it finally to Eureka Springs. And this was their first depot. The first passenger train to Eureka Springs arrived at this new wood frame depot on January 24th, 1883. And someone that lived during that era wrote this. The depot was a large two-story building with offices of master mechanic and superintendent of bridges and buildings on the second floor. The first floor constituted a railroad eating house in the south end and a large passenger waiting room. Then the large ticket office with the baggage room north of the ticket office, in which 3 to 5 men were employed daily. So this shows you just an idea of what the station looked like early on. Here's another photo you can see off to the right. You can see one of those palace cars, one of those really nice Pullman cars, as they would come from all over the country to this area. By 1913, 8 passenger trains a day were arriving and departing Eureka Springs. They had Joplin to Helena through trains. They had Joplin to Eureka motor car, and they had 2 Seligman to Eureka steam trains that handled Frisco connections there. Just some more photos. You can see all the wagons coming in, bringing in goods, bringing in passengers, picking up passengers. Another photo shows some of the stage lines, the stage hacks. This might have been a stagecoach line that went to Harrison, for instance, or up to Springfield, Missouri, picking up passengers at the depot before the line was extended. Just a couple more photos just showing how busy. This was the XNA of the day in Eureka Springs. It was. Telegraph, U.S. Mail came in there, passengers, express shipments before there was UPS. It all came into the depot. It was a very, very important place. Well, the railroad, of course, publicized this new line, and you can see they called it the Road to Health. On the left, you see a December 1899 ad that appeared in the Frisco Line Employees magazine. So there's cheap home seekers excursions. There's all this beautiful scenery. If you look over to the right, that ad said the Eureka Springs Railway is the only railroad running into the greatest health resort on earth. So they really promoted it up. They were very good at the promotional elements. A couple more promotions here. This shows a timetable over on the left where you could get on a Frisco passenger train at 8:25 p.m. in St. Louis Union Station, St. Louis Union Station, downtown St. Louis. And then by 11:37 the next morning, you could be in Eureka Springs. So that was a big deal. Another bit of advertising here. In 1884, Powell and Cairns commissioned architect Isaac Taylor to build a luxurious hotel atop a cliff that overlooked the heart of Eureka Springs. Powell and Cairns saved no expense, spending some $294,000, 1884 dollars, to construct the building. It proved to be a massive endeavor, with Irish stonemasons carving and assembling 18-inch thick blocks of limestone from the White River Quarry, just 10 miles away from the construction site. These artisans were brought over to the United States by Powell's Eureka Improvement Company for the sole purpose of building the hotel. And like the Eureka Springs Railway, the company was also headed by Powell Clayton. And following nearly 2 years of construction, the Crescent Hotel, named after the mountaintop upon which it sat, was finally complete. So we'll take a look at the Crescent. It's called the Grand Old Lady of the Ozarks. On May 20th, 1886, a grand opening gala was held in what is now the Crystal Dining Room. Hundreds of well-dressed guests danced across the hardwood floors to the music of a live orchestra, enjoying fine wine and delectable treats. And among the most prestigious guests at that opening was James G. Blaine, a former U.S. Congressman, U.S. Senator, and Secretary of State. Blaine was also a candidate in the most recent presidential election, losing what was a tight race then to Grover Cleveland. Other dignitaries in attendance included state Supreme Court justices, federal magistrates, Arkansas constitutional officers, and numerous high-ranking military men. This picture is a little bit compressed, makes it look very narrow, but the hotel boasted every modern convenience, from electricity to elevators, and was well known for its location near the springs that supposedly held the healing waters. Here's an ad, 1905. Come up to Eureka Springs on top of the Ozarks. So, seizing the popularity of the Eureka Springs healing waters, the hotel was leased by the Frisco Railroad Company from 1902 to 1907, and the company had hoped to serve their customers with this hotel while they cultivated ridership from places throughout the Midwest. The railroad seized this opportunity to use the hotel for that. This is one of the earliest photos I have of Eureka Springs. The Crescent enjoyed great success for many years, but the economy worsened in the 1900s. And the hotel opened for business only then during the summer months, if you can imagine that. The Eureka Springs Investment Company formulated a plan to use the facility year-round, and in 1908, they opened the hotel as an elite girls' boarding school called the Crescent College Conservatory for Young Women. The college operated September through June, converting into a hotel into the summer months. The college remained open for 16 years, but was forced to close its doors in 1934 due to lack of funding. It was reopened in 1929 and remained open until 1933. And here we have a picture of the motor car that made the daily trip from Joplin to Eureka Springs. And the women on back of this observation platform of the car are the Crescent College and Conservatory for Young Women graduates. And this photo was featured in a 1913 timetable. Just some more pictures of the Crescent over the years, the early years. It's changed. There was a fire in 1967 that took off the top floor of the hotel. So if you look at the hotel today, it doesn't quite look the same. The top part of it doesn't, but of course the rest of it does. So this just gives you an idea of the Crescent through the years. Now I got to tell you a spooky story. You may have heard this. In 1937, the neglected historic limestone structure of the Crescent Hotel was sold to a man named Norman Baker. He was an ex-vaudeville magician, a controversial radio personality, and a false cancer doctor from Muscatine, Iowa. After leaving a trail of victims to his false cancer cures in Iowa and New Mexico, he eventually made his way to Eureka Springs and turned the Crescent Hotel into the Baker Cancer Hospital. Historians estimate that he was bringing in as much as $500,000 a year before the federal government finally cracked down on him in 1940. He was tried in Little Rock and sentenced with 7 counts of fraud. Investigators found that the bogus, quote, treatments that Baker had administered had actually hastened the death of many patients while denying them the proper medical treatments that may have saved their lives. Baker later offered the property to the state of Arkansas for use as a tuberculosis sanatorium, but the state did not pursue that offer. The Crescent Hotel, that beautiful hotel, then sat vacant for 6 years before being reopened again as a hotel. And it's still open today as a hotel. Let's go back to the depot. Notice on the left lower corner of this picture the new electric streetcars at the depot. Public transit began in Eureka Springs in 1891 when the city acquired 10 streetcars to be drawn over rails by mules, and they acquired these cars from Houston, Texas. Electricity first came to Eureka Springs in 1893 when the Citizens Electric Company light and power plant began generating. And the state of Arkansas, through all those years, had 8 streetcar lines serving 13 towns around the state, plus the last operating mule line car in the country. The cities in Arkansas that had streetcars were Eureka Springs, Fort Smith Van Buren, Helena, West Helena, Hot Springs, Hoxie, Walnut Ridge, Pine Bluff, Sulphur Rock, and Texarkana. And Eureka Springs was one of those towns that had streetcars. Well, when you got to the depot, a lot of times to shuttle you around the town, and a lot of times before the streetcar railroad was developed, you had what was called a tally-ho. This is a tally-ho. It's a taxi service in the city. This one was from the Crescent Hotel. Here's another example of a tally-ho. So that's how you got around. And back then, of course, the streets are mud, and it could be very, very bad in the rainy season, as you can imagine. This is an interesting photo. Look at the bottom of the photo. What you see in the very bottom of this photo is a single truck, double-end, monitor roof, open mule car. It was operated by the Eureka Springs Electric, Light, and Street Railway Company. And this particular car is outbound on the Crescent Hotel line and is climbing the steep hill between Harmon Park, where they had a car barn, and the hotel. The car will soon be arriving at the rear entrance of the Crescent Hotel, as seen in the photograph here, before returning downtown. Just to show you some of these mule-drawn cars, they're fascinating. This is a single truck, double-end, monitor roof, open mule car that was operated by the Eureka Springs Electric, Light, and Street Railway Company. This particular car is inbound on Spring Street on the Basin Springs and Assembly Grounds line, and is just passing Crescent Springs. And in this photo, the car is carrying a band and has an attached banner that reads, International School Teachers Home Meeting at Central Hall, 7 o'clock tonight. So some event was going on, apparently. Another mule car at Harding Spring. In 1897, around 1898, the horse cars were replaced with electric streetcars, and you'll see that in some of the ensuing photos. This is the car barn that would later become Harmon Park. You can still see some of these structures today. There's a mule-drawn car in front of the car barn. Another photo of the car barn there. Then we finally got to electric cars. In 1898, all the rest of the cars were retrofitted with electric motors, and overhead wires were installed for power. And for the next 25 years, the clickety-clack of the streetcars could be heard all along the lower and upper Spring Street, and then up to the Crescent and Thatch hotels and back. This photo was taken in 1900 in Grotto Spring, at the Grotto Spring. Here's Citizens Electric car number 14. This would have been taken sometime before 1910. This is the same car a little later, car number 14. Those guys look very enthused about their job there. This just gives you an idea of what the streetcars would have looked like. This was taken, I don't actually have that location there. A mystery photo from the Eureka Springs Museum trying to determine where this was taken. This is electric car number 20. Basin Springs, Harding Spa, 1898, Harding Spa. Here's a real colorized, real picture postcard of Crescent Springs. Ooh, sometimes it takes off on me. Let me back up. There we go. This is Grotto Spring with Citizens Railway electric car number 14. But you can see, even in the downtown section, you can see the trolley tracks embedded in the mud. How about this photo? Trolley tracks passing by the Victorian home of Dr. C.F. Ellis. Again, downtown, Spring Street, showing the trolley tracks. That's about 1915. Very busy. Unfortunately, for those who loved riding the trolleys, the 1920s brought automobiles, and along with them, the demise of Eureka Springs' first mass transit system. It would be another 55 years before Eureka would see trolleys on her streets again, but on July 31st, 1978, transportation in Eureka Springs was reborn with tires instead of tracks. So you can still ride these kind of trolleys. So I mentioned this presentation is about the railroads in Eureka Springs. Let me kind of give you a rundown on the railroads. Here's a review. The first railroad, of course, the Eureka Springs Railway, they tried to get the Frisco to purchase it and extend the line east or south, but that never happened. They had, as I said earlier, envisioned it to go to Little Rock. In 1909, the line was completed, though, from Joplin, Missouri to Helena, Arkansas, 359 miles. But tragedy would soon strike the line. On August 4th, 1914, 43 people were killed in a tragic head-on collision near Neosho, Missouri, at a place called Tipton Ford. In 1917, the federal government took control of most of the United States railroads due to the war. In 1921, a major strike shut down the entire line, leading to service disruption, riots, and even a lynching in Harrison. 1927, of course, was the great flood of the Mississippi River, and all those tributaries backed up into Arkansas. There's great flooding over in the eastern part of the state, shutting down service around Georgetown, Arkansas, from the overflow of the White and the Little Red Rivers. So the line went from the Eureka Springs Railway Company. In 1899, it became called the St. Louis and North Arkansas Railroad as they began extending it east. That was completed in 1909. Then, on August 1906, the railroad became known as the Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad, called the North Arkansas Route or the North Arkansas Line. And then they produced a map in one of their timetables, and I'm going to zoom in on the map here. And you can see roughly how the line flowed, all the way from Joplin in the upper left corner, down diagonally through the state, down to the Mississippi River at Helena. Another map showing the counties that were served throughout the line. Then the next railroad would take over in 1935. It was called the Missouri and Arkansas Railroad. The earlier railroad, the preceding railroad, I should say, the Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad, was in receivership by 1927 and eventually foreclosed upon and sold to the Texas railroad financier Frank Kell from Wichita Falls, Texas, on April 16, 1935. It was sold to him for $350,000 for the whole railroad. The railroad was renamed the Missouri and Arkansas Railway. The railroad would again see tragedy on August 23, 1946, as one of their modern motor cars collided with a milk truck in Harrison, destroying the car and killing the engineer. And that tragedy would soon be followed only 1 month later by another huge trainmen's strike. This one would prove to be fatal to the North Arkansas line. And you would think that's the end of my story, right? No, hang in there. There's some more to this story. After 20 years of no railroad in Eureka Springs, the Eureka Springs and North Arkansas Railway began operations around March 1981 when Bob Dortch, or Robert Dortch Jr., moved 3 steam locomotives from his Scott and Bearskin Lake Railroad near Little Rock to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. They had to put those steam locomotives on trailers and take them up those curvy, steep roads to Eureka Springs. The Eureka Springs and North Arkansas Railway is still going. Today, it's a for-profit passenger tourist railroad and offers 1-hour excursion tours, a catered luncheon train, and a catered dinner train, each lasting a little more than 1 hour. They do this the months of April through October. It operates now on the last piece of this one-time 359-mile railroad. It operates on the last remaining 2.5-mile piece of restored right-of-way formerly belonging to the defunct Arkansas and Ozarks. And we didn't talk about Arkansas and Ozarks, but I have it there on the lower part of this slide. They took over after the strike shut down the railroad in 1946. They took over and in 1949 and began operations between Harrison and Seligman until a devastating 1960 flood. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So back to Eureka Springs, the early years. This is a Sanborn fire insurance map from September 1892, and it shows the facilities. You can see the lines, which are the tracks coming in, and north is actually this way, not this way, but north is actually this way. And you can see the turntable, see the circle? That's the turntable to turn a locomotive. You see a 2-stall engine house. You can see the depot over to the left. That's the passenger depot. The freight depot over to the right. If you find the circle, the turntable, just to the right of it is a little building. That was their carpentry shop in which they would do a lot of woodworking on passenger cars or freight cars, that kind of thing. This is some old stereoscopic views of the engine shop. You can see a locomotive over to the left sitting at the engine shed. Back. Here's another photo taken up on the ridge showing the engine backing onto the turntables, what was called a gallows type turntable. And they could turn the engine around and put it in the shed and work on it, various things like that. This is that carpenter shop that we saw on the Sanborn map where they could do woodwork. You can see a steam locomotive on the track there. Here's a picture around 1900 with a brand new Dixon 460 10-wheeler, engine number 3 at the shops. If you look closely at the photo, second from left is Richard Cairns. Second from left. Another shop photo. This was taken in 1906. Those guys would climb all over those engines for the photo. I think it'd be a little hot. There were derailments. I don't have a lot of photos, but here's one that's supposedly taken in Eureka Springs. This car almost went off the trestle. Notice they've built some cribbing to try to stabilize the car, and they've got some cables trying to pull it back upright. That would have been a harrowing experience, I'm sure. They would put these Kansas City to Helena observation sleepers on the back end of the train. Now look at this accident. This is a wreck west of Elba, Arkansas. Elba, probably nobody knows where that's at. It's 8 miles south of Leslie, if you know where Leslie is at. This wreck happened on September 13th, 1914. Can you imagine in the middle of the night, you're asleep in your nice Pullman, you paid great money to be in that sleeper car, and the next thing you know, you're leaning on the side. Maybe they were used to it if they had done a lot of ocean liner travel and great storms, but here's a zoomed out view of that 1914 Elba accident. In 1912, the Missouri and North Arkansas announced that the locomotive shops in Leslie and Eureka Springs would be closed. It was a big blow to the city, and all the maintenance would move to the new shops being built at Harrison. As a consolation gift to Eureka Springs, the Missouri and North Arkansas built a brand new limestone depot in 1913. And the architecture of this depot is almost identical to a 1910 Kansas City Southern depot that was once stood in Sulphur Springs, Arkansas, another town that had hoped to become a big springs resort. But this depot was built in the then new and fashionable craftsman mode. The station employs the locally favored rusticated limestone masonry. The rectangular building has a red tile roof with deep eaves supported on large brackets, 2 dormer windows on each of its long sides, and a cupola with a pyramid roof. The flat roof shelter over the south end of the passenger platform is a flamboyant collection of craftsman details, shaped wooden capitals topping the wooden columns that stand out on stone bases, and cantilevered roof joints shaped to match the column capitals. Notice the trolley to the right. You can see the electric trolley. Oops, let me back up. Sorry about that. You can see the electric trolley to the right in the photo. It was a busy place. As I said, it was the XNA of the day. Look at all the trolleys coming in now. The tally-hos are gone and the trolleys are in. And by the time this photo was taken in 1915, automobiles have now entered the scene. But I want you to notice something in this photo. Of note in this photo is Powell Clayton's old cannon that he named it. It was called Chapultepec on the south lawn. Can you see the cannon? Okay. According to noted Eureka Springs historian Otto Rayburn, the cannon was captured by American troops in 1847 during the Mexican-American War and was brought to Eureka Springs. Rayburn quotes another man named J. Rosewater, and he wrote, "It saw service during the Civil War and was left at Little Rock, where General Powell Clayton, Reconstruction Governor of Arkansas after the Civil War, obtained it and brought it to Eureka Springs in 1882 while making his home here after he ceased to be governor. For years, it was displayed in public places throughout the city, and at one time it stood on the lawn of the Crescent Hotel. General Clayton gave it to the city. Apparently, it was moved from the depot And several years later, a group known as the Civic Improvement Association built an enclosure and pedestal for the cannon. Let's see, what else did they say? They said the cannon could be moved up or down on the carriage, but to aim it right or left, it was necessary to turn the carriage. Eureka Springs citizens used to pull it up to the mountaintop and fire it on July 4th of each year to celebrate something. So Eureka Springs, let's see, what else did they do? The old Chapultepec was sacrificed for scrap metal during World War II. At the close of the war, the government sent the city a captured German howitzer, which was placed at the Basin Circle. It may still be there today. I don't know. Interesting. Well, one of the last railroads then in Eureka Springs was the Missouri. Once the Missouri North Arkansas went into receivership, Frank Kell bought the railroad, named it the Missouri and Arkansas Railway. And this railroad would see tragedy as their new motor car collided with the milk truck. I mentioned that. And then the trainman strike would almost finish it off. Here's the depot in Eureka Springs sometime around the late 1940s. I mentioned those motor cars that Frank Kell bought. He ordered 2 sleek new streamliners. These were called moto-railers in 1938. This example was the number 726, named after John Martineau. John Martineau was the 28th governor of Arkansas from 1927 to 1928. The American Car and Foundry built this modern, air-conditioned, believe it or not, motor railer in 1938. There was only 2 of the cars. They ran daily service beginning June 26, 1938, between Neosho, Missouri, and Kennett, Arkansas. They cost $94,962 each. They seated 33 passengers, fitted with air conditioning, powered by a 200 horsepower Hall-Scott horizontal petrol engine. This car was scrapped in 1949. This picture was taken in Chicago in 1938. This is the other car, the 705, named for Thomas McRae. Thomas McRae was an American attorney and politician from Arkansas. He served as Democratic member of the United States House of Representatives from 1885 to 1903. He was the 26th governor of Arkansas from 1921 to 1925. During his tenure, the Arkansas Railroad Commission was reestablished. Somebody said, what is this car? We haven't seen any color photos of the car, but what did it look like? That's pretty close right there. Somebody colorized that black and white photo. That's pretty much what it would have looked like. Could you imagine in the rural hills of the Ozarks of Arkansas seeing this modern contraption coming down the line? Well, toward the end of service, this was September 1946 at the Eureka Springs Depot. This is one of the last times the motor railer came in. My late friend Gene Hull took this photo, and he took this photo of them unloading. You can see they're either loading or unloading cans of milk onto the car. But look how beat up the car is. It was rugged territory they went through, and I'm sure they hit many a cow in the day. This photo is kind of sad because this is September 6, 1946. My late friend Gene Hull took this photo of the last Missouri and Arkansas passenger train into Eureka Springs, pulled by a conventional steam locomotive and passenger cars. This would be the last day of operations of the North Arkansas line. The line would be abandoned. The depot there in Eureka Springs would be unused for a time. Ultimately, the route chosen, along with difficult topography and highway competition and labor troubles and absentee ownership, were factors in the demise of the railroad. But we still have the amazing waters of Eureka Springs. So I'm going to skip some of these. These are just some of once the railroad shut down, they had some maps showing what potential railroads might take over. Most of it did not happen. But let's talk about the water. The Eureka Springs Water built Eureka Springs, and it saves the day again. We talked about the city was founded in 1879, partly in response to the stories of the curative powers of the water. John S. Tibbs was the earliest shipper of spring water from Eureka Springs. He was known as the Eureka Basin Water Shipper, and his business was across from Basin Spring. He is presumed to have sold his business to William Duncan, and it was Duncan who named it the Eureka Springs Water Company and then marketed it as Ozarka in 1905. Richard Ryan Thompson bought it in 1924 from the receiver and ran it until 1966, in which he sold it to Arrowhead Puritas Water. In the 21st century, the Ozarka brand resides in Texas and is owned by Nestle. You can still go to Walmart and get it, right? Oh, you have it right there. You know, I had thought before doing this presentation I wanted to bring a case of Ozarka water for you all to enjoy during the presentation. But there's some old ads about the Ozarka water, spring water from the top of the Ozarks, natural or carbonated. How about this? They actually ordered it October 1918. They ordered this special car. It's glass enclosed inside, glass tank, box car. And notice it's for water and ginger ale. Isn't that interesting? They had these cars. You would see them in Eureka Springs. In fact, somebody even made a real colorized postcard of these Ozarka cars. Another picture taken. That was taken in the 1950s of one of the cars there in Eureka. The last railroad, next to last, I should say, the Arkansas and Ozarks Railroad Corporation. After that trainman strike, the railroad was completely shut down and abandoned. It would be almost 4 years later before this new company, the Arkansas and Ozarks, would reopen the line. As I said, only between Harrison and Seligman. The rest of the line was pretty much abandoned. Here's their first train, February 8th, 1950. This is in Harrison. The high school band came out, a big gathering there as the train rounds the corner to the Harrison Depot. You can see as they're leaving town, you can see the caboose, you can see the band members there. That was a big, big day in Harrison, Arkansas, believe me, when the railroad came back. The Arkansas and Ozarks Railroad, they would still bring in these tank cars of Ozarka water, or empty tank cars to fill with Ozarka water. This picture was taken on May 13th, 1958. This was a writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a man by the name of Wayne Lehman, made a number of trips around the area and took these photos here. So this is just probably the Arkansas and Ozarks agent just inspecting the cars as they're coming in. And that's at the Eureka Springs Depot. Then they would climb up on top of the cars. The water was piped directly into the glass line railroad cars, and then there were distributors that bottled it when the rail cars arrived at their destinations around the United States. Ozarka water was also served aboard all the Frisco passenger trains. But this just gives you an idea of early 1950s. This is Mr. Sam Leith. He was showing off the Ozarka water products inside the depot in 1961. This is what the depot looked like. You can see the Ozarka water sign on the depot at that time. This picture was taken in 1960. Here's 1962, 1971. Notice the tracks are all gone by that time. But the Arkansas and Ozarks, this is what their little train looked like. They had these two little General Electric engines. This is just outside of Eureka Springs at the junction. They're doing some switching there. You can see this is 1958. This is an example of the they only had two locomotives. And this is one of the trestles they went across just south of Eureka Springs. 1956. There's their caboose, 1956. So what killed the railroad? Well, this story started with water, right? It kind of ends with water, lots of water. There was a really, really bad flood on May 5th, 1960, a flood on Leatherwood Creek. And this is the trestle on the left, 75-7 between Beaver and Junction. This would be the final straw that killed the camel's back. The railroads just said it was going to be too expensive to rebuild, and so they abandoned the railroad. And you can see why. It's hard to run trains on that right there. That's at Beaver. That's at Beaver. That shelf, that we saw earlier, the trains running on that shelf that they had blasted, the shelf was underwater. There's the bridge at Beaver. That bridge structure still stands, believe it or not. There it is. Isn't that incredible? That's what did it. In fact, this is Beaver resident Pearl Fuss Below paddling his boat through the Narrows. He's the one that owned and operated at that time the Beaver General Store and Filling Station. Of course, by 1962, the railroad just lay dormant. You can see it's just destroyed. And that would be the end. But wait. There's just a tad more here. 20 years later, the Eureka Springs and North Arkansas Railroad would begin operations in March 1981. I told you about how Mr. Dortch brought those steam locomotives up. Here's how he did it. Oh, I'm sorry. Got to advance the slides. Here we go. That's how he did it. Can you imagine meeting that on the road in Eureka Springs, some of those roads coming into Eureka Springs? Can you imagine? So he brought these steam locomotives from down South Arkansas near Little Rock. That's a wood-burning locomotive there. And once he brought them in, Hollywood took notice, and they filmed a couple of series, The Blue and the Gray, maybe The North and the South were filmed there. Actor Stacy Keach. Yeah, that's right, Stacy Keach. He's the one that came in on one of the films, I remember. This engine was actually used in the building of the Panama Canal. It sat in Eureka until just recently, and it was shipped to Anna, Texas, near Dallas, where it's on static display now. He also brought in a Shay locomotive. This is an old logging locomotive. Bob Dortch was really a train buff. There's the Panama Canal engine pulling one of the passenger trains. So for the first 20 years, they ran steam locomotives on this line. Steam locomotives returned to Eureka Springs. Never thought it would happen, ever in 100 years would it happen. They even brought in a turntable from Fort Smith, Arkansas. They brought a turntable in to turn the engines around. Steam was back for 20 years, until 2001. There's the wood-burning locomotive on the left. And then at 2001, they went to diesel, and that's what you can ride today. Now, that's the end of my presentation. I have just a few final comments to mention. In April, they reopened the season for the Eureka Springs in North Arkansas, and in talking with Ricky, there's a planned excursion. I'll ride along with you. Maybe we can do the lunch train together, okay? So if you go there, you can still see the Crescent Hotel. You can still see the depot is still there. You can ride on a 2.5-mile portion of what was once a 350-mile long railroad. But if you want to learn more about what I talked about today, there's all kinds of little books out there. You can find these on Amazon, eBay. Harvey Cragen wrote a Eureka Springs Railway driving tour. It has GPS information if you want to drive the old line. The late Edwin Toll wrote a book about the Eureka Springs Railroad, a small little book. More substantial book, probably the most thorough book on the railroad, was written by the late Dr. James Fair. It was called The North Arkansas Line. You can still find that book online. Short Line Railroads of Arkansas by the late Gene Hull is another resource. Railroads of Northwest Arkansas by Robert G. Wynn. This is available through the Washington County Historical Society. My friend Barton Jennings, who works for the Arkansas Missouri Railroad, wrote a little book called Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad History Through the Miles. This book just came out. I just got mine for Christmas. It's Kenneth Barnes, down in Conway, wrote this book called Mob Rule of the Ozarks. It's about that 1921 to 1923 strike, one of the worst railroad strikes in the history of the United States. So this book just came out. So if you're interested, Kenneth Barnes, Mob Rule in the Ozarks. And then finally, if anybody wants to visit with me, I'll be happy to stick around. I'll be happy to field any questions. I know my presentation went a little bit over an hour, but does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Wasn't Robert Lincoln involved in the Pullman in the railroad?
Yes, I believe so. I would have to refresh on that, but yes, yeah. And in fact, the Lincoln, one of the first sleeping cars was associated with Lincoln. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions or comments? Well, if not, I'll stick around if anybody wants to visit. I've got cards if you'd like my card. But thank you for coming today. I hope it was informative. Yeah.